Welch was the chairman and CEO of General Electric when he tripled their shareholder value. He did over 200 acquisitions. He was a tough guy to work for. They called him Neutron Jack because he laid people off, but the buildings remained. So it's like a neutron bomb, right? Kills the people, but the building is left standing. And Jack Welch said something that I think it just rings true to me when we talk about relationships. This would be, in my estimation, a good motto for people to have. Jack
Welcome to the show. I'm so happy that you're here. You are going to be so happy that you are here. I am Kim Sorrelle. I am an author, a speaker. I get to do so many fun things in life, but my favorite thing to do is meet cool people. And I get to meet some of the coolest people that walk the face of this earth. Today, Tom Hagerty. He is an amazing man with an amazing career. But what I love about him and what you're going to love about him is it's not just about business, it's about people. And you don't get that with everybody, but it's a big thing to him is how important relationships are, how they should work, what we're screwing up, what we're doing wrong, and what we can do better. He's written a book about it. You're going to hear a lot of great advice, great things from him. And so I just want to say, Tom, welcome to the show.
Kim, thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a great opportunity for us to, serve your listeners well and talk about relationships and how difficult they can be, but how rewarding they can be as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In a time where relationships are questionable in some areas. So Tom, before we dive into that, I want people to get to know who you are. So I would like you to tell me about 8-year-old Tom.
Okay. 8-year-old Tom?
Mm-hmm.
Eight-year-old Tom was in the second grade. He was attending St. Xavier School in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I am a Catholic by birth, no longer Catholic by tradition and practice, but I was in the second grade and life was good. We lived in suburbia. My dad was a veteran of two wars, both World War II and Korea. He was called back into Korea because he was a tank commander and they apparently needed him twice. So he saw a lot of carnage and came back and made a life for us. I'm the oldest of 10 children. So when I was in the second grade, I had two brothers and a sister, and eventually had six more kids in the family. So and it was, Kim, a fairly idyllic life. I mean, it was a three-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood of three-bedroom ranches. Kids played in the street. We lived on a cul-de-sac. Parents painted bases there, so we played baseball games and pickup basketball games and so forth. And it was just a really nice, idyllic kind of life to grow up in. And in those little three-bedroom houses, they didn't hold all 10 kids because we moved to a much bigger home that my brother now owns. Actually, bought it from my parents, but native of Cincinnati. I went out of town for college. I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, learned a lot there. I had 10 years of Jesuit education, which, for any listeners who are aware of the Catholic traditions, the Jesuits are the intellectuals, they used to call themselves, at least. They're the priesthood that really populated universities and certain high schools and so forth, and taught critical thinking. And I think that was one of the foundational things that I learned from the Jesuits over those 10 years, is just being a good analyst, a good critical thinker, a person who can look at a problem and know not only its solution, but also the source. So I think that's an interesting part of my background. But back to 8-year-old Tom, geez, I rode bikes. I stayed out all day. Parents were never worried about where I was. Like I said, it was an idyllic kind of neighborhood upbringing, with a lot of families just like ours, and a lot of good friends from those days.
Yeah, wow, that sounds really great. Not everybody has that same 8-year-old experience I did. We were come home when the street lights go on, you're out all day playing and your parents don't really know where you are, but they don't care. It's safe in a neighborhood, out with friends, they know your friends. So it was all good. And I would imagine with 10 kids, it's really okay if a few of them are missing. That would be all right.
That
Give
would
your
be
mom a little
perfect.
breather. Yeah,
My,
and
my, my mom was one of those unique ladies where she used to say, I would rather have all of you playing in my yard than anywhere else because I know where you are then.
mhm.
And she carried that tradition through all 10 kids. I mean, the door was always open, the backyard was always open, the Kool-Aid ice cube tray was always well stocked, that sort of thing. So it's
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Oh my gosh, we're like the same person. I was born Catholic. And what's interesting to me about that is I liken it to being born Jewish. There's other traditions, Christian traditions, of course, other churches, but when you're born Catholic, yeah, it is it's such a big part of the fiber of your being. And even if you don't go to the Catholic Church anymore, like I, I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school for a while. Some of my education was Catholic school, so I can relate to a lot of that. And then I went to an Assembly of God church, and then I went to non-denominational church, and then now I go to mass sometimes. I'm feel blessed that I'm comfortable in any church in the world. And I love that I can go anywhere. Some people are very uncomfortable in a Catholic church because they don't know when to kneel, when to stand, when to do what they're supposed to do, how to cross themselves, whatever. And so I feel fortunate about that. But there's something beautiful and wonderful, I believe, to be said about being raised Catholic.
There is. I mean, I think the tradition alone is something that recommends the Catholic Church well. If that is the style of worship that most gets you closer to God, let's say, it's a fine tradition. I think it's unfortunate with some of what's obviously gone on in the church over the past couple of decades. But I don't know really of another religion outside of the Jewish faith, like you said, where that's an identifier. People say I'm a Catholic. They don't say I'm a Christian. I don't know many people who say I'm a Methodist or a Presbyterian. I'm sure they're out there, but you know, most of the other faith traditions in the Christian faith anyway, they'll identify themselves as a Christian, but the Catholics are unique in saying I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
a
that's
real
so
badge
interesting.
that a lot of people like to wear.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. I have run into people who don't think that Catholics are Christians. So just to put that rumor to rest, Catholics are indeed Christians. It's the same Jesus, same God.
Yeah.
We all believe the same, whatever. There's nuances, different things that every religion has. The Methodists versus the Episcopalians versus Lutherans versus the Christian Reformed, whoever. Those things don't matter. It's the same God, it's the same Jesus, it's the same faith. And so anyway, Catholics, yes, are indeed Christians. We just call
Well, I
ourselves Catholics.
I have been a member of a megachurch that didn't start as a megachurch 25 years ago, 26 years ago when we started going there. It was a small group of people who said, you know, I love God, I just don't love church, and there's got to be a better way to do church. And so 12 folks from Procter and Gamble mortgaged their houses, found a pastor, guaranteed him a year's salary, and said, we want to start this thing in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we don't know where it's going to go. And now it's one of the fastest growing churches around. It's got branches in different cities and so on and so forth. But back in the day when we first started going there were some people on their staff who would refer to people like us as recovering Catholics. And I always found that to be kind of offensive because, I say, you know, talk to me when you invent a public education system in America, because public education doesn't exist without the Catholic tradition starting schools that were different, you know. Um, Talk to me when you invent a public hospital system. Talk to me when you literally invent the university system in Europe. You know, I mean, the tradition is there. And I think the outreach that the Catholic Church exhibited over decades and hundreds of years has been on balance better, you know, than many of its alternatives. Again, a lot of, you know, real systemic problems. You know, going back to the days of the priestly abuse and the cover-ups and everything else, there's problems there, but I think on balance, our society is better for that. And I would challenge anyone to say, give me another faith tradition that has that kind of pedigree, if you will, or that kind of history of doing good for others.
Yeah, well, and that's a big deal to the Catholic Church. It's a big deal to Catholics is to give back, is to help people in need. And I recently had a conversation actually with one of my granddaughters she had heard from somebody that people that aren't Catholic but are Christians believe that you go to the altar, you say the words, and then you're saved, you know, and whatever. And that Catholics believe they have to earn their way to heaven. Nothing could be farther from the truth. I don't know where anybody came up with that. It's not a matter of earning your way to heaven. I mean, we all know that Jesus died for our sins. I mean, you know, we are all well aware and believe that Jesus is God and all of that. But we also believe, on top of that, Catholics believe that it is our duty to help people in need, that it is something that we should do to be helping humanity. And so that too is a beautiful part, I believe, of the Catholic Church. And a lot of churches feel that way. So there's a lot of great churches out there and a lot of great churches that feel that way, that you need to help people, that, you know, it's not earning a spot in heaven, but you're doing it because you're human. And
Right.
That's what we should do.
I think though, and you know, I don't know in what era you grew up, but when I was coming through the lion's share of the Catholic faith, for me, it was in the mid 60s all the way through the 70s and 80s. And I think the Catholic religion brought a lot of that earning your way on themselves, because, you know, there's in the Christian tradition, there would be heaven and hell. But the Catholics manufactured purgatory because everybody has to go there first. You're not ever going to go automatically to heaven, which I find difficult. But you know, so we had purgatory and we even had limbo. I don't know if you remember
Oh
limbo,
yeah.
but that was
Oh
for the
yeah.
babies who weren't baptized that
Right.
passed away. So I think we brought some of that on ourselves. Is the earning thing is no, you've got mortal sins, venial sins, you've got purgatory, you got limbo, you got these different little way stations. You got to go to confession. You better come out, get on your knees, say the Our Fathers and the Hail Marys, and hope that you made a perfect act of contrition. If you remember the nuns talking about that, what is a perfect act of contrition? So it's yeah, we didn't do ourselves any favors there.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I think there's a lot of things that are misunderstood about the Catholic Church, misunderstood about church in general. And you know, I think people should be allowed to just believe the way they believe. You know, often you don't change anybody's mind. You know, we were talking before we went on air about politics and how it's separated families, for goodness sake, politics, separating families. Politics separating families. I said it 3 times because to me, it's so unbelievable that any family, any relationship would allow politics to get in the middle of it, get in the way of it. And religion can do the same thing. And it's like, well, you know, live and let live. I believe strongly that you should be the person that you believe God created you to be and want grace to be that person, and then extend that grace to everybody else and allow them to be who they believe they're created to be and believe how they believe, and the world would be much happier. Just love people. Don't judge them. No judgment allowed.
I heard a great description of religion and its primacy in people's lives when it was on a podcast that I was listening to some time ago, and I never forgot this person quoting it this way. He said, when it comes to a faith tradition, if your faith is founded in love and has some kind of contemplative tradition, which means there is some kind of service, some kind of practice that you can go through. He said, if it meets those two criteria, then it's a religion and it's on equal footing. You know, if it's founded in love and has a contemplative tradition. And I thought that was an excellent example because it gives you the freedom then to say a Buddhist or a Confucian or a person of the Jewish faith or the person of the Muslim faith. They're fine traditions. And if it helps those people, those constituents, get somewhere in their life, be a positive difference to others, you know, give of themselves, if it helps all of that, then by all means practice it. You know, I'm a student of some of those especially the Eastern religions and some of the traditions there, and some of the, you know, you read some of their scripture and you're amazed, especially in relationships. When different religions talk about relationships in their own scriptures, just like we do in the Bible, it's amazing how similar they are. And you know, it's it's just silly to me that we quibble over nothing, you know, with other religions, you know, accept someone for being Jewish, accept them for being Muslim, accept them for being Buddhist. If it's adding to their lives and the lives of those around them, you know, go practice it and be a good Buddhist.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think that we can be judgmental. Christians can be a little judgmental and think that if you're not a Christian, you're a nothing, you're a, I don't know. And then I always come back to, I am so grateful that there's not going to be a line someday and I'm going to be at the front of it going, you're in, you're out, you're out. Because I'll tell you, if I'm at the front of the line, everybody is in because I don't like the out. So just love people and let them be who they believe they're supposed to be. And
Absolutely. If God created everyone, and I believe as you do, obviously, that he did, you know, he did, she did, it did. If God created everyone, I don't think he set it up to say, but I'm going to let you go this direction, and therefore you're not going to heaven. Therefore, I'm excluding you. You know, by luck of the draw, by luck of the region that you were born in, the tradition of your country or your city state or whatever. Um, and by golly, what happens to all the people who were living before Jesus? You know,
right, right.
if Jesus is the Christian Redeemer, which we believe he is he then saying, well, I'm sorry, Aristotle and Socrates and Plato and you know
Whoever, everybody,
and the
right?
Buddha and et cetera.
Hmm.
You guys weren't around when I was around, so you're out. You know,
Right.
that makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. And again, some people believe that other things to be true, and that's fine. Believe whatever it is that you want to believe. But I just also say it's a wonderful thing to give people the grace to believe what they believe
Yes,
without judgment, just whatever that looks like for you and whatever that means.
absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. And
And
like I said earlier, you know, the great faith traditions, without exception, are founded in love and have some kind of contemplative tradition, have some kind of practice that you can engage in to become better, if you will.
yeah,
And that I think is a great definition for any religion.
yeah, absolutely. So good. And we're talking about relationships today, and God is the creator of relationships. And John, it says that God is love. God is love, not that God loves, but God is love. We're we're created in his image, so we also are love. But sometimes we're not loved to each other the way we should be loved to each other. And relationships are so important to God. You know, throughout the Bible, it's all about relationship. And but we've gotten away from that in so many ways and need to come back to the power of relationship, of being in community with people. And I think about like when my mom died years ago, and it was tragic, and all of a sudden, and it was horrible. And my dad was a mess. He was just a mess. And at the time, I was going to an Assembly of God church, and one of the pastors from the church came to the funeral home, and my dad was just weeping. And my dad said to him, "Am I going to see her again? Will I see her again?" And the pastor's response, which was perfect at that moment, was, "God is so relational on earth. It's hard to believe that he's not also so relational in heaven." And I thought that's true and beautiful. And so here we are talking about relationships, and it all stems back to creation, it all stems back to the beginning, but we've kind of fallen away. Tom, I heard a statistic the other day that men in the United States statistically have 0.7 friends. Isn't that incredible?
Not surprising. I mean, here's a stat that is somewhat related to that. 60% of us, according to Gallup, say that, again, 60, not 16, 60% of people say that loneliness is my constant companion.
Mhm.
Now, 0.7 friends, that's I hear different stats all day long depending on what you consume and so forth, and it's shocking to me that our relationships are just in such peril, such almost free fall. I think some of it was due to COVID, but not all of it. We were trending in an area of not trusting each other, not believing each other, isolating from each other. We were trending that way before COVID, but I think COVID just accelerated it. And once we came out of it, you would think that things could go back to normal, but they really never reset.
Yeah. So why is it? Why is it that we struggle so much in relationships?
I think there's a lot of things right now that are happening societally. I mean, first of all, we said in the pre-show that we wouldn't talk politics, but we are a very polarized society right now, especially in America. So there's the polarization effect. There's a burnout effect. We came out of COVID, and the burnout and the stress was at a high level. A lot of companies retrenched and laid people off, and work at home has its benefits, but that isolated us as well. Um, we have situations with people. I think that we just, I alluded to this earlier, we just don't trust each other. I mean, we have had a decline in trust in America specifically since the 1970s, when we said, basically in the 70s and 80s, about 55% of people say that I fundamentally trust other people. And now that percentage is 32.
Wow.
32% of people say I can trust someone else. And I just think that, when relationships fray like that, we talked about the economic stress, but there's the social media and digital aspect of this too. People are now able to get anything they want at the click of a button without ever leaving the couch. If you want a meal, if you want a book, if you want a new television set, heck, you can buy a new car on Amazon now. So you never have to leave your home, which makes it, a very potentially dangerous situation for people that are wanting that kind of lifestyle. They just don't have the human contact. They don't need the human contact anymore to function. It used to be, when you and I were growing up, going to the grocery store was a big deal. It was an adventure. Or back to school shopping. You actually did it in a store. You picked things out with your mom or dad or both as you walked the aisles, and some of your classmates might have been there the same day. And Everybody's getting their crayons or their new school pants or whatever. Now we don't need to do any of that. And so I think that societally we're in danger of seeing relationships continue to crumble if we don't take action and do something about it. I think
Uh,
that's up to each one of us.
yeah, I think you're so right in the age of AI and everything else that we've got going right now. And some of it brings fear to people. And I always think, man, fear is so negative in so many ways. Like fear isn't going to help you. Like be excited, anticipate, and pivot and do what you need to do with AI, with how the world is shaping and what's going on in the world. But relationships, it's so interesting to me because we're in an age also where I was just talking to a woman who has grandkids who live in China. Her son lives in China and she sees them once a year. But meanwhile, though, they're on FaceTime or on Zoom or on something where they're able to communicate and see each other and talk to each other. Not the same as being in person, but awful darn close. And
Right,
so
right.
you would think that relationships would be exploding rather than declining with the tools that are out there for us.
You would think, one of the stats that I read very recently is that especially when you get into the age group of 35 and under, that age group is losing its sense of conflict resolution, of being able to resolve conflicts face to face. That's why we are seeing terms like workplace ghosting and quiet quitting and bare minimum Mondays and all the things that business talks about. But the younger people are finding it easier to flee than to fight, if you will, for a relationship. It's easier, if there's a hint of trouble and a hint of incompatibility, I'm out. And by the way, I'm out in such a way that you don't even know I'm out, and you may not know it for a while because I just don't reach out and say I'm out. I just disappear. I think those kind of things are really going to be damaging to society. And I think the challenge for parents now, and I have four grandchildren. My daughter and her husband, blessed me with four really fun people. Their ages are 12, 8, 6, and 4. So we've got them a bunch right together. And when you asked the question earlier about what would the 8-year-old Tom be doing, I was with the 8-year-old grandson yesterday at the driving range, showing him how to hit a golf ball, and he's pretty good, and we've been there a number of times, but having a lot of fun with him. But you're right, the conversation that takes place face to face over a hot dog for lunch and hitting golf balls or whatever is there just isn't a replacement for that in-person contact and that in-person connection. I shudder to think if they were to move away or I was to move away, what would that look like on FaceTime? How do you get up close and personal with a kid who's trying to learn how to play a sport like golf and say, trust me, if you do this that I'm telling you right now on screen, you'll be good. There's no substitute for the in-person activities.
It's so true. It's so true. And there's power in the silence. There's power in just being in a room together with not talking, a lull in the conversation, a moment of not talking, even watching something together or whatever, which if you are on Zoom or FaceTime, whatever, you have to be continually talking. If we just both sat here and didn't say anything to each other, we'd be like, well, I guess it's time to hang up now. But
Right.
when you're in a room together, it's okay to have moments of silence and you're still bonding, you're still together. And so absolutely there
Yep.
is no replacement to in person.
Well, I think the screens also limit us in a way. I mean, just to, forget golf for a minute. Let's say that he and I were out taking a walk. you know, uh, the scenery changes, the bird that wasn't there before is now on the lawn and you notice it. The dog that wasn't barking before is now barking because you're passing the house or whatever. So there's ways of interaction that are just spontaneous in terms of what is going on. Whereas, you know, you and I, or you and your grandchildren, or me and my grandchildren, if we were on this screen, it would be almost scripted. You know, I want to tell you what I did last week since we last talked. You'll tell me what you did last week. And when that conversation's over, it's pretty unlikely that the deeper questions are going to be exposed on a Zoom call. It's going to be, "Bye, Grandpa. It was nice talking to you. See you next Sunday." You know, so
Yeah, so true. When I think of the whole dating online thing, I know so many people who have met their person that way. So it's great. You know, it's great for so many people who have found their person, but it's also so easy to just swipe, right? To just ignore somebody. Whereas if you're meeting somebody in person, body language is such a big deal. You know, there's so much more to building a relationship or figuring out if you like somebody than what you can write in a profile. And so I think that's kind of interesting too when it comes to relationships.
I really think that's a great point. And when I talk to people, some single friends of mine who are in the online dating scene, it seems like it's not just the initial act. You know, like I think this person has some good shared interests, and I want to get together right now. You know, I want to get together for coffee right now. It's more like, no, I'm going to text back and forth. Sometimes seems to me endlessly. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Do you believe this? Do you believe that? You know, what's your political persuasion? What's your religious background? What's this? What's that? You know, and at any juncture throughout this text or series of texts, you just get the sense that, why don't you guys just get together for coffee and figure out whether you think each other is pleasant, and then go from there? I mean, whatever happened to face-to-face meetings being something that was the norm? You know, now it's almost the exception. No, I thought that she was interesting to me, but then we exchanged 14 texts and talked twice on the phone, and we never met, and I'm not going to meet her. You know, I just
Yeah, right,
I
right,
shake my
right.
head.
Yeah, you can save a whole lot of time. Just meet for coffee. Just meet for
Right.
coffee. And it's entirely different. I mean, when you meet somebody and actually get to know them, you get to know them as a person, not as a, a Democrat, not as a Republican, not as whatever label you want to put on them, but you're meeting Tom, you're meeting Mary, you're meeting whoever it is you're meeting a person. And that's, to me, that's what relationships should stick to, is the personal level. The other stuff, you can talk about it, but for it to separate you, for it to be the deal breaker, because man, I don't know, should politics ever be the deal breaker? Like you were talking about politics and how it's separating families. Why? Why is that? I always think no matter who's in office, I still eat every day. I still have a roof over my head. I still have a car to drive. I still have a job. I still have my family. I my life doesn't change a great deal. My life would change a great deal if I watched CNN every day. I think I would be so depressed, or MSNBC or whoever, and that would change my life. But realizing that at the core, my people are still my people, my friends are still my friends, my family's still my family, and my life is still great.
I think with politics especially, I mean, religion, I get it, that can separate some people if one or the other or both have very strong convictions of I'm right and you're not, kind of a thing. But with the political landscape, you say, is it really worth not talking to my brother when everything's going to be different in 2 years or 4 years? This is a very transitory separation. You know, I mean, that's a high price to pay in my book, to say, because of what the next 3 to 4 years looks like to you, I am going to distance myself from you, you know, based on a person who you'll never meet, never interact with, At best, you'll have a donor relationship with if you choose to. Um, you have no influence over that person and his or her politics, but yet you are willing to say, I'm not talking to my brother because of that. That makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it really doesn't. It's time to, if that's happening in your life, it's time to take a step back and go, wow, does it really matter? Does it really matter? And I think often we let conversations turn into confrontations. And if you can keep things at a conversational level, realizing too, I don't know about you, Tom, but I don't know that I've ever changed anybody's mind about anything, right? Like people believe what they believe, and then you can have a conversation about it and talk about why you believe the way you do, why they believe the way they do. But they're not all of a sudden going to say, oh my goodness, I've been wrong. All these years I voted for the Democrat. I should be a Republican. They're not going to do that. Or I've been a Republican all these years, but you're so right. In this one conversation, you have completely switched me and now I'm the other party. Like that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen.
Right.
And so why let that interfere with relationships?
No, and I have had, some fascinating conversations with people who are atheists, and I think that when you dive into that tradition, if you want to call it that, let's remove from what I call the crosswalk atheist, who says, "Oh, my grandmother was hit in a crosswalk by a drunk driver. She was killed. There can't be a God. If there was a God, he'd never let something like that happen." Well, I used to call them crosswalk atheists for a long time, but I mean the real committed, well-read, thoughtful atheist, it's interesting to talk to someone like that because they do have strong convictions and strong beliefs about why there isn't a God and why that is manufactured by man. Because I read an author once who said that there's two big reasons why people can't be an atheist, and that is that they can't accept ultimate responsibility for anything. I'm responsible for everything that happens to me. They can't accept that. It's too big a burden to have that without some kind of divine intervention. And the other reason is that they are terrified of their own mortality. There has to be something beyond this. And that's really where the atheists come down is it's a tough practice because you've got to say this is all there is and I'm responsible for everything. And that's to a person who's thought that argument through, that's a pretty heavy burden. and it's not for the faint of heart. So,
Yeah, no,
but
no.
no, I mean, you can have fascinating conversations with everyone, if you just open up your ears and shut your mouth for a little while and give them their due. Fascinating conversations with Buddhists and Confucians, talking about what their idea of reward is, what the end of life reward looks like, and for us, we say heaven. We almost make it a universal statement that you're either going to go to heaven or you're not. And the Buddhist says we don't go to heaven. We don't have a heaven. So we call it something different. And it looks different. So when you tell me that I'm not going to heaven because I'm a Buddhist and not a Christian, I say, fine. Um, not part of my tradition anyway. I
Right?
won't miss it.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, yeah. So we let those things separate us in families. We let those things separate us in neighborhoods, in the workplace. And I have been in business. I started my first business when I was 18 years old. So business is something that I've done my whole life. I love it. I love every aspect of it. I love to serve people is the biggest thing. And number one to me is relationship. And people want to do business with people that they have a relationship with, that they can respect, and that talks to them, treats them like a human, not as a commission or a sale or whatever else. And the same with our coworkers. Like people want to, if you look at who in your office people want to talk to, they're the people that aren't judging everybody, right? They're the people that are just loving people and letting people be who they are. And so, but we've gotten away from so many things when it comes to relationship because computers have taken over so much of jobs and people are in cubicles and whatever else. And I don't know if people are still meeting around the water cooler, and talking about last night's bachelorette show or whatever, but uh it is tough. What do you how do you see relationships going? What should be done with relationships at work and at home?
Well, when I was putting the book together, The Business of Relationships, my book, I tell people often that it was the book that was never supposed to be a book because, and I'll shorten this up dramatically for you, but I started collecting business quotes, inspirational quotes from business leaders a long, long time ago, and I would write them down because I thought, man, that's a good turn of phrase. That's a good guidance, for anyone. And I collected probably several hundred of these and began to look at them in terms of writing an essay around that quote that illustrated something about a personal relationship. And those essays started out going to my kids and a few close friends. And my daughter swears it wasn't her, but I think it was her. But somebody said to me, hey, these essays are pretty cool. You ought to see if they could be a newspaper column, back in the day. And I said, no, 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 I don't want to do that. But then I sat down one day and had lunch with a friend of mine who writes for the Business Press, one of the big conglomerate weekly newspapers. And I showed a few of them to him. And he got back to me and he said, man, I really like these. This is interesting. I could see this being a weekly column in our paper. And with your permission, I'll pitch my editors. And the editors came back, as I recall, several weeks later, and they said, uh, yeah, these are really good and interesting, and but we're not an op-ed newspaper. We're not a advice newspaper. We are a fact-based business newspaper. And tell your friend if he had enough of these, they could be a book. And that's something I really said, no, 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 no. Uh, but you know, Steve and I had a couple other lunches, and he said, "You doing anything about that? You do, He gave me the names of some publishers. I developed some on my own, and lo and behold, you send a half-baked manuscript off to people, and one of them got back and said, "We'd like to publish it. When will you have the rest of it done?" So I tell people the first half of the book took about 8 years because I was, dabbling and playing, and the second half of the book took 3 months. So
Yeah.
it was like, now you got to knuckle down and do this thing.
Mhm.
But to your point, I think when it comes to relationships, there seems to be broad agreement in about 12 characteristics of a thriving personal relationship. If you're going to have a good personal relationship with somebody, you're going to have qualities like perspective and honesty and trust and integrity. You're going to have a sense of appropriate risk and a commitment to change. You're going to be able to prioritize. You're going to be resilient. You're going to be humble. You're going to exhibit humility. There is going to be a commitment factor there. And in these 12 qualities that I have in the book, are not just Tom saying that's what it is. It's sources like NBC News or Marriage.com or the Harvard Business Review or the Northwestern School of Medicine Journal. They don't all mention the same characteristics, but they gravitate toward those 12. That these are fundamental, foundational things that a relationship is going to have. If you have no sense of perspective, if you're not in it for the long haul, and every minor disturbance, like we said before, quiet quitting, workplace ghosting, all that, if that becomes the de facto for you and you don't have perspective, then you probably won't be in a thriving relationship. You might be in the same house together, but you're just coexisting. The same with resilience, the same with trust, the same with honesty and the other characteristics. So that's where I I found my inspiration from the business leader, because I said, who better, to instruct us than somebody who is paid to foster good relationships, and well paid. A CEO is well paid to foster good relationships. When you think about it, in the basic essence of it, they have to have relationships that are thriving with their vendors, with their customers, with their employees, with their stockholders, shareholders, stakeholders, other regulatory agencies. You better have a way to foster good relationships in all of those arenas. And I think many times, unfortunately for us, a business leader is looked upon as just that. He runs Bank of America, or she runs Google, or et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of the badge they wear. But we forget that not only are they fostering good relationships, but many times in interviews, in shareholder letters, in annual reports, in internal communications, these people are saying things that transcend the boardroom, transcend the shareholder letter, if you want to pay attention to it. And that's where I had a lot of fun with the essays, is looking at some of these quotes and saying, I know he or she didn't say it in that context, but this could be spun as great advice in a personal relationship. And that's where I had a lot of fun with this.
Yeah, yeah, so true. So true. All those attributes, all those things are so, so important in a relationship. You talked about trust earlier and you brought it up again as one of the 12. And I think of like in 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, does not boast, something that we hear at weddings all the time. Our eyes glaze over just because we hear it so much, right? Well, one of the things is that love always trusts. Love always trusts. And when I took a deep dive into that, I dedicated a year to figure out the true meaning of love. And when I took a deep dive into love always trusts, what I figured out is that um, it's easy to assume the worst in somebody. It can be easy to get jaded. It can be easy to be critical. All those things, to try to read between the lines, to wonder, are they really telling me the truth? I should investigate this. Like maybe it's not real. Well, none of that is trust. All of that is the opposite of trust. Whereas if you love the right way, and you love in a way, because relationships involve love, you need love in a relationship, whether it's a coworker or your spouse, whoever. So when you love the right way and work on love always trusting, love always trusts, what that means is that you let people's word be their word. Like don't try to read into things. If they tell you something, okay. You don't have to correct them. You don't have to change things. You can just let people tell you, and then just trust. And the beautiful thing that happens is when you trust people, people want to prove that they're trustworthy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so at some point in time, maybe the relationship was a little rocky, and maybe they did tell you some stuff that maybe wasn't true, or they expanded the story, whatever. But the more you trust, the more you live in love that always trusts, the more that's not going to happen. And you're just going to be able to trust all the more.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I would say that when it comes to trust, one of the things that is really inspirational to me, and I, like any flawed human being, needs to be reminded of this. And sometimes the reminder comes from up here, and sometimes the reminder comes from someone else. But trust is really one of those qualities where you are placing the other person squarely at the center of the relationship. And I think that's so important, because we oftentimes fail at that. We want our agenda. We want our viewpoint accepted. We want our opinion validated. And when you place someone at the center of the relationship, that's trust, because you're basically conveying to them that you have my life in your hands, so to speak. And I think that's a powerful part of relationship. And it was interesting as you were talking about trust. There's a quote from a gentleman. He touched Cincinnati, let's put it that way. So I'm somewhat beholden to him for his quote, but he was a university professor for many, many years, became a university president, served as the president of the University of Cincinnati, which is a big business. It's a 40,000, 50,000, person campus, and all of the associated infrastructure and funding and everything else. And he became a writer and a leader, a thought leader in management theory back in the day before management theory was so bifurcated as it is now. But his name was Warren Bennis. And Warren Bennis said, trust is the lubrication that makes it possible for organizations to work.
Mm.
And obviously he said that in a context of business management, right? It's lubrication that allows organizations to work. But where I had fun with it is looking at the personal relationship, the family relationship, the spousal relationship, the friendships that we foster. And if trust isn't there, then the gears are going to grind. The engine is going to stop because I don't trust you, you don't trust me. We keep our distance, we shade everything, just enough truth, but not all the truth, back and forth. So I think that there is, and that's one example, but I think there are many examples of business leaders who say things like that you say, well, that was a line in a book, or that was a quote from an interview or something. But when you really look at it a little deeper, you say, well, I think that applies to relationships as well, because trust is that necessary lubricant, if you will, that keeps things running smoothly. And to your point earlier, when you said that people are, given trust, and that makes them want to be trustworthy. It's a very symbiotic relationship, and it's beneficial. We need
Mm.
it. We need to
Yeah.
trust each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And trust gets broken. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, and how do you restore it and all of that. But the reality is, with the majority of our relationships, trust maybe never get broken. I think you kind of have to look for it or manufacture it in some ways, if you've got the right kind of relationship going to begin with. So what is your biggest advice? Because we're talking all kinds of relationships, business, whatever, but personal relationships are gigantic. And the rate of divorce in our country, and people can do what they want to do. Sometimes divorce is necessary and whatever. But what is your, if you were to just say, hey, if you do this one thing, your relationship's going to be better, what would that be?
I think that if you do one thing, I would say look in the mirror. If there's a problem, look in the mirror first. What's my role in it? What did I do to exacerbate the situation? I have said to people about this book, for instance, it's not for the faint of heart. If you can't look in the mirror, if you always want to point the finger out at someone else, it's her fault. It's his fault. She didn't do this. He didn't do that. If that's your default mechanism, is to look for blame, as the Chinese, I don't think it was a Chinese philosopher who said it, but it's attributed to the Chinese culture. They say that fix the problem, then fix the blame. Okay. And fixing the problem is oftentimes being fearless about looking in the mirror. So I would say people need to do that a lot more than most of us do. I'm guilty as charged, of not following my own advice because of self-preservation and ego gratification and all the other things that we battle. But I would say look in the mirror. and maybe a corollary to that would be also understand that good relationships take hard work. This isn't some walk in the park. Let's pick a few flowers, throw them in the air, everything's rosy. We'll never have a speed bump. We'll never have a wreck. It's just not that way in human relationships and human dynamics. So I think that would be the other is just understand that if you're in it for the long haul, it's going to be work. You need to be committed to doing the work.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that. I haven't really thought about this, but because you hear that all the time. It takes takes work to have a great marriage, takes work to have a great relationship. It takes work, it takes work. And in the back of my mind, it was always like, well, why does it have to take work? Like, why can't it just be uh roses and rainbows and whatever? But the reality is all good things in life take work. The best things in life take work. The most wonderful things in life take work. You want to be a great golfer? You don't just go out on the golf course. It takes a lot of work to get there. You want to buy a boat one day? Man, you got to save some money to be able to buy, which means you've had to work hard for that money and you've had to make sacrifices perhaps and not bought other things because you needed to save that money for your boat or for your house or for whatever it is. So things that are worth it in life take work. Things that are truly worth it, that are truly valuable, take work. And so, of course, relationships do. And then it's all the more satisfying. If somebody gives you a boat, you're like, oh, wow, I got a boat. You work hard for that boat. You save for years. You work hard. It's your hard-earned money that goes into that boat. Man, you're washing that thing every day. You're polishing. You're making sure it's clean. You're making sure the engine's well kept. You treat things so differently when they're not just handed to you. And I think the
Yeah.
same is true of relationships. If the relationship is so easy that you never have to work at it, you never have to have a hard conversation, you never have to really understand somebody and give them the grace to be who they are. You never have to do any of those things. I don't know what kind of relationship is that, but when you've worked for it, when you put in the effort, you put in the time, man, that's a relationship to treasure. And uh,
Well, when we were talking earlier about my 8-year-old grandson and going to the driving range, I was giving him a couple of lessons that are functional. Here's how to do this, here's how to do that kind of things. But I also took the opportunity to say to him that you don't practice to get good at something. You practice so that you can't fail at something. It's a different way of looking at it. And the real pros, whether they're in golf, basketball, ballet, anything, they're going to say that I didn't stop practicing when I knew how to do something. I I never stop practicing because I never want to fail at something. So that muscle memory is there, and that's why I said, his name is Remington. I said, Rem, tell me this. I said, why do you think that a pro stands on a putting green for 2 or 3 hours, putting ball after ball after ball after ball, maybe hundreds of them, but he's only going to hit 30 putts in a round? So why doesn't he just hit 30 practice balls? I said, because he wants to hit 1,000 of them so that he can't fail, you know, arguably. And the same is true, the Michael Jordan didn't stand at the free throw line and shoot 100 free throws after every Chicago Bulls practice. He didn't do that because he thought he would shoot 100 free throws in a game. He might shoot six, but he's shooting 100 free throws every day so that he can't miss. So,
right, right, right. Such a good
and
point. Such a
and
good
and,
point.
and I think that's part of the hard work that we were alluding to earlier that you brought up, in relationships is, you know, are you going to practice a relationship for the 30 minutes maybe of conversation that you will have with your spouse or your child or your parent or whatever every day. If we're lucky, we talk to each other for a half an hour a day. Does that mean you only need to prepare for that half hour? Or are you thinking about that and preparing for that and preparing yourself for the good dialogue? And it may take hundreds of hours to do it well, right? You're reading books about it, you're watching podcasts about it, you're getting nuggets from interviews that you've heard or interviews that you've done as a podcaster, and you say, all of this is doing something for the conversation that I'm about to have with my daughter, and it'll last 15 minutes. But I just spent hundreds of hours schooling myself and preparing for it.
Yeah. 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 So true. So true. Such a great point. Yeah, you've dropped some great gold in this episode today. I appreciate it a lot, and I think you've given all of us a lot to think about. And I think too, just the fact that we're talking about relationships, I think, is so valuable and so important because it's something that we can lose so easily and not recognize the value in them. But man, at the end of your days, are you going to be watching more TV, or are you going to want to see the people you love? And so it's this life should be all about people and all about relationships wherever we are. So
I agree 100%. And if I can throw out one more little nugget here, this is really one of my favorites. Jack Welch was the chairman and CEO of General Electric when he tripled their shareholder value. He did over 200 acquisitions. He was a tough guy to work for. They called him Neutron Jack because he laid people off, but the buildings remained. So it's like a neutron bomb, right? Kills the people, but the building is left standing. And Jack Welch said something that I think it just rings true to me when we talk about relationships. This would be, in my estimation, a good motto for people to have. Jack Welch had a very simple 5-word quote. He said, "Change before you have to." In the context in which he said that, Kim, he was giving a speech to his senior leaders, the folks who were in charge of GE Medical or GE Finance or GE Aerospace or whatever, all the different business units that fell under that GE umbrella. And I said before, he was a tough guy to work for. He said to them in this speech, he said, if you are not number one or number two in your marketplace, I will fix you, close you, or sell you. So change before you have to. So that was a pretty direct, pretty tough way to look at business. But when you think of those 5 words, change before you have to, in the context of a relationship, does that mean you change before you have to the financial irresponsibility that threatens to wreck your family? You change before you have to the passive aggressive nature with your kids that is alienating them? Do you change before you have to the bad temper? Do you change before you have to the budding addiction? That to me is almost a mantra that you could say, if I'm going to be fearless about looking in the mirror and I'm going to be capable of high self-awareness, then change before you have to is a pretty simple 5-word mantra that you could take to heart.
yeah, I agree. That is so good. Change before you have to. So true. So true. Yeah. That's a lot to think about. And but so good. That is so good. So we are out of time. I cannot believe it. This time has just flown by, but I would love for people to know how they can get in touch with you, how they can buy your book. Where do you want to send people?
Well, the book is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, so it's available in both electronic as well as print versions. And every little bit helps as a first-time author. I am available for speaking engagements and corporate training, which I've done some of as well. And there's information in the back of the book about that. But You can write to me at businessofrelationships@gmail.com. And my website, which is coming online soon, I hope, is thetomhagerty.com. And I will be endeavoring to put some nuggets up there on a regular basis, short hitters and more information about speaking and writing. Yeah. So
That's great. That's awesome. That's so awesome.
easy stuff.
Yeah. And of course, it'll all be in the show notes, and anybody can reach out to me about anything that they want to know about you. I can direct them your way. So, Tom, thank you so much for being here today. I so appreciate everything.
Kim, it's been wonderful. It was, yeah, what a breath of fresh air. You have a great show, and it was a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate you being here. I hope you got as much out of it today as I did. And I just want to say, until we see each other again, I pray that you keep your heart open and your days full. I just said that completely wrong, but that's okay. I'm going to say it again because maybe he'll splice it. That's what I get for taking a little bit of time off. Okay, here we go. I'm going to just say that little part real quick again while it's still recording. Okay. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. Tom is amazing, fantastic. This was so good. And until we see each other again, I just pray that you keep your heart open and that you live your love loud.